Hello, this is just a shortish reflection that was inspired by some research I was doing recently prior to making a recording for a Suffolk Jungian group. There is a term used in Greek myth for a type of story which occurs not only in Greek myth. You can find comparable stories in the myths of just about everywhere, called Katabasis. Katabasis is the term used by the Greeks for the descent into the underworld, and it's comparable to notions such as the medieval Christian concept of harrowing stories, the harrowing of hell in the Christian context. Both in the Katabasis stories and the harrowing stories and similar things in other religions and other cultures, there's the notion of there being a dark place, an underworld. Usually the underworld is inhabited by the dead, and the dead in the underworld are usually not happy. It's not a sort of blissful paradisal realm where everyone's sitting on a cloud playing a harp. It's where the angry dead are, the tormented dead, the souls of the wicked, or those who are disturbed in some other kind of a context. And occasionally other beings as well, sort of monstrous, demonic style beings that inhabit this underworld. There are some exceptions to this where it's not wholly clear. So, for example, there's an early Welsh story of King Arthur and his band of warriors descending into Annwn to go have adventures there, and it's not wholly clear ever really in the small amounts of writing we have left surviving to us that talk about Annwn as to quite what Annwn is. It's a mysterious otherworldly place, but there's no particular references to the souls of the dead being there, although they may be. It's described more like almost like a kind of a fairyland or something like that, except the beings there do not appear to be obviously distinguishable from ordinary humans, so they're not described as being 10 foot tall or 3'6" or whatever. They're just kind of people whose appearance does not raise remark amongst those visiting the place, although they have magical powers and abilities. But they appear to engage in very similar kind of activities to your average medieval Welsh aristocrat. So although it's a mysterious otherworldly realm, it's not particularly hellish or horrible or anything like that. So there is the debate as to whether the Arthur and his men's descent into Annwn is really a harrowing in that sense of the word, but it is certainly a journey to another world, a world that has its risks. So perhaps we can broaden this notion out a little bit to include places that are not desperately hellish. But generally speaking, Katabasis type stories are a descent into the darkness. And you can view that and understand that in a whole variety of contexts. It can be taken as a literal, spiritual sort of, vision quest type of experience of people entering into another dimension, entering into another world, either physically entering into another world, or at least their souls, their essences, entering into another world and experiencing the weird and the wonderful things of that world. Or it can be taken in a more psychological Jungian sense that the other world, the dark place, is the unconscious mind of the individual, their consciousness going into their unconsciousness and confronting all of the frightening, scary, disturbing things that are kept there. In this context, it's, from a Jungian point of view, it would be a shadow journey, a journey to confront your own dark side, so that the demons and freaky things in the underworld are reflections of the individual themselves rather than external presences, external beings. You could, of course, take this in a much more human understanding. Vast numbers of people, tragically, have had horrendous experiences at the hands of other human beings. They've been locked up in brutal prisons where they've been tortured and abused. They've been hauled off by some medieval dictator to the torture chambers to have their toenails pulled out, or modern day dictators to have their toenails pulled out or be wired up to the electrics. They've been in war zones with bombs flying left, right and centre, and poison gas and germ warfare and Lord knows what else happening. They've been dragged off into concentration camps. They've been subjected to maybe a much smaller scale but pretty brutal domestic terror if they've lived with some horrifically abusive individual, a partner, a parent, or whoever it may be, who's molested them and battered them senseless and done Lord knows what else to them. They've had a journey into hell, but at the hands of rather human type monsters rather than things with 16 legs and 3 heads and tentacles. All of those are harrowings of sorts, or Katabasis experiences, a journey into darkness. Now, in a storytelling context, the Katabasis, as well as the harrowing story, are journeys into the dark realm for a specific purpose. They're not holidays or tourist curiosity trips just to see what's there. They are descents into the darkness, usually to find something or someone and retrieve them. So Orpheus going into the underworld to find his beloved Eurydice and bring her back is an example of a Katabasis story, because he's going there with the intent of finding someone and bringing them out, and that is a singular feature of these kinds of stories when they're mythological or fictional, modern day fictional works, films, TV shows, etc., with a similar sort of theme. The journey is either to rescue a person or retrieve some treasure, some object, something that is going to be brought back to the land of the living, or the land of the happy, the sane, the land of brightness, and so on. And again, you can put that in kind of Jungian psychological terms, that the thing to be rescued, whether that's another person or whether it's a magic cauldron or a magic sword or something of the sort, is a treasure of some lost part of the individual themselves, like the shamanic idea of soul retrieval. It's a journey to get something that has been lost or taken or abducted or somehow ended up in the dark realms, and bring it back to consciousness, so it becomes part of the conscious mind and integrated into the conscious mind. It is a confrontation with the forces of darkness for the purpose of retrieving that which is lost. Now, obviously, most people who end up in horrific prisons or concentration camps or extremely abusive relationships are not willingly going to those places, and nor are they going to those places for the purposes of retrieving anything, although there have been rescue missions where individuals have tried to go to break into somewhere horrific in order to rescue a loved one, things like that. So that does occasionally happen, but obviously it's very rare. The vast majority of people who have the more earthly version of a hellish experience, whilst they may bring things out at the end of it, if they survive the experience, they might have kept some loved one alive in the concentration camps and looked after them, and when they're liberated they bring that person out with them, or the person stuck in a horrible abusive relationship may come out of it with something, but they've very rarely gone into it with the intent of bringing anything out. So the more real world version of these hellish journeys and experiences perhaps doesn't totally match up with the mythological notion of a Katabasis journey into the darkness. Or the flip side version of this, the journey back up, so having won the treasure, you've still got to get back up to the upper world again, is anabasis. It's the return journey, which can be just as harrowing, although often in storytelling the return journey is glossed over quite quickly. The big adventure is the getting there and the retrieving of the lost person, the lost object. The journey back is often the shortest part of the storytelling experience because of the nature of narrative. It tends to assume that once the precious person or object is found, that's the end of it, really. That's pretty much the end of the story. And anything else is a bit of an afterword. In more, shall we say, either real-world experiences or internal psychological journeys, it's worth bearing in mind that the journey back is no less easy than the journey in. Just because you've got your treasure doesn't mean you waltz out in 3 seconds flat. Then everything's done and everyone's clapping and everyone's happy. You've still got to go through, if not the return journey through precisely the same footsteps. Maybe you go through a different route to get out, but you still got to go through a difficult journey out as well as the journey in. It's not an easy thing to do, and that's always worth bearing in mind when we put this into trying to compare it to human experiences, as well as thinking of it in more kind of broad spiritual, magical, mystical, psychological terms. I think it's also worth bearing in mind, when I had the idea of recording this, I've been trying to remember the name of the person, but I cannot. And I keep saying, well, I'll give it another half hour and see if I can think of them, and I can't think of them. So maybe one of the people listening will know the name of the individual I mean. But there was a philosopher who spoke about the capacity for human ruthlessness and darkness, particularly in the context of survival. That people in the real world, not just in a kind of storytelling terms, but very much a real world experience, people who have faced very extreme situations will do very extreme things to get through and survive. The stories about crashed planes where individuals have eaten the corpses of the other passengers because there's been nothing else to eat, and so they've resorted to cannibalism to survive. Stories of cities under siege where again the food supply runs out and people resort to cannibalism to survive, whether they're eating the dead or they are murdering people with the explicit purpose of eating them. Sometimes that happens as well. People who've done the grimmest, darkest, most awful things in order to survive. Not just in those kinds of very extreme circumstances, but someone who's in a relationship with an extremely abusive person may do some quite dark things to either try to please that abusive person, and they end up doing things which they wished afterwards they'd never done, or they do quite dark things to get away from the abusive person. The courts are full of stories of people who've knifed their abusive partner, or done something equally grim in order to try and get away from them because they've not known what else to do. And the philosopher, if I remember rightly, the philosopher in question was using the image of a fox with its paw caught in a trap and gnawing its own leg off in order to get out. And that kind of intense survival instinct where you'll end up doing things that you would, under any other circumstance, never do, probably never dream that you're capable of doing. Somebody breaks into your house in the middle of the night and you well, in America, you shoot them in the head. Over here, you're not likely to have a gun in the first place, but you might bash them one with the nearest blunt instrument that comes to hand, or do something equally grim, even if you consider yourself a very peaceful person, a very gentle person, unless you kind of, when it comes to defending yourself, defending your kids, defending your home, you might suddenly find a capacity to do very, very brutal, dark things in order to survive. Part of that journey into darkness you can understand as not only confronting other people's darkness, which could be either things being done to you right now, or it could be going back into memories you've got of horrible things that happened years and years ago that you've never quite, to use psycho jargon, processed those experiences, and maybe you've got to confront them in your own mind, in your own memory, and part of your journey into hell is into the hell of your own memory, things that have happened to you in the past. But part of it is also realizing that sometimes the monster is you, in a sense, in that your capacity to kill, maim, rob, cheat, steal, do whatever in order to get through a situation and survive, to resort to behaviours like the people on the crashed plane engaging in cannibalism, that you would never in a million years have dreamt yourself capable of doing, but you suddenly realise there is this part of you that dwells deep, deep, deep down in the darkness, in the hell of your own mindscape, that will do that thing in order to survive and get through and start life again, or in order to protect your child or rescue your beloved husband, wife, dog, or whatever it may be that needs to be rescued. You'll do it in order to sustain. that person, to bring them out of a place of darkness. And people have done, stories I've read about people who've had usually a child, who's been brainwashed into some cranky religious cult, and the family have gone on and rescued them from it, and faced up to all of the verbal abuse and the threats, and that relative hating the sight of them for quite some period of time, until they've been deprogrammed and they've realised that they're better off out of the cult than they were ever doing well in the cult. Those family members have got to put up with all of that kind of hellish experience of the abusiveness and the rage and the resentment and the Lord knows what else. And you may have the experience that if you've ever tried to help a friend, a relative, somebody who's been stuck in a very dark place, whether that's addiction or alcoholism or an abusive relationship, and you try your best to get them out, they very rarely thank you for it in the short term. They may call you every name under the sun and kick you, slap you, do whatever to you, because they're so full of darkness that it spews all over you, even though you're the one trying to help them. And if you want to help them, you've kind of got to endure that hellish experience, because if you're not willing to endure it, then they'll be straight back into the dark place that they were there previous. And your rescue will, again, the journey back up is not just getting them away from the violent husband or the dodgy cult leader or taking them away from their drugs supplier. That's not the end of the story. I say the Katabasis, the return journey. You've then got to get them to a point where they are out of hell, not stuck in it, and that's not an overnight thing. So that these stories can be understood as analogies for dozens of different ideas and experiences that people have, either at the sort of mystical level or a very mundane level, and every shade in between, in which the descent to the hellish place, the dark place, whatever you want to call it, and obviously different religions have different names for the dark place, is the realisation of what you are capable of doing when you're pushed into a corner, when there seems no other way out, and you've tried all of the nice solutions and none of them have got you anywhere, and sometimes you have to go and do some very grim things in order to get free of a situation. But even doing the grim thing and getting away from the drug dealer or the dodgy cult leader or whatever it is only the first part of the story. The getting away, the journey back, is a much longer part of the story. And there are perhaps elements. Having mentioned Orpheus already, when he rescues his dead wife from the Underworld, from the land of Hades, he's told part of the journey back, the Katabasis back, is that until they're through the gates, the gates to Hades and out into the land of the living, until they're both out, during the return journey, he must never look back. She's walking behind him, and he must not look at her until they're both out. And of course, inevitably, as these stories go, as soon as you're told you can't do a thing, you know full well the storyteller is foreshadowing the fact that the person's going to do the very thing they've been told not to do. He looks back at her, he's kind of tricked into looking back at his wife, and she's gone from him forever. He can never have her back. Similar to the story of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt in the Old Testament. Similar kind of a notion that by doing the one thing they've been told not to do, that the rescue is over and done with, and boom. So even having gone into hell, gone into the land of darkness, completed the tasks that have been set, sometimes it goes wrong on the return journey, just as people trying to help their various relatives overcome alcoholism or drug addiction, or deprogram them from cultic brainwashing, or all those kinds of things. Sometimes they kind of get part way there, they get almost home and dry, and then something goes wrong. The person's back to drinking, they're back to shooting up heroin, they've run off back to the abusive husband or abusive wife or whatever it may be that the family had tried so hard to get them away from, and they've gone back into the darkness. Rescue attempts do not always work. That's the nature of the beast. It doesn't always work. Sometimes the darkness wins, either permanently wins, or at least has a victory, even if maybe another journey can be made on another time to attempt a second, third, fourth, fifth, however many attempts there are at rescue. So there's that element there. And just to briefly mention another term before finishing, another Greek term, nekia, is rooted in the word nekros for death, the dead. Nekia is not a journey into death, into the underworld, but it is related to it. Nekia is a form of necromancy. So the magician performing the ceremony does not go into the land of the dead. They stay in the land of the living, but they conjure up the spirit of the dead from the underworld, and it's the spirit of the dead relative, whoever it may be, that is making the journey, not the living hero who is making the journey. So that the individual is conjured up and they appear as a ghost, a spectre, and usually they're consulted. Most of these necromantic rituals were to ask for information known only to the dead person. So they usually provide whatever answers to whatever questions they've been posed, and then that's pretty much the end of the ceremony. Once the answers are given, they're not needed anymore, and they descend back into the underworld. And whilst there are certainly loads of people who have practiced various mediumistic, clairvoyant type activities over the millennia to communicate with the dead, it can, as well as being taken in a literalistic sense, it can, or an actual sense, it can be taken as a metaphor for contacting parts of yourself or memories of your own life that seem dead and forgotten and gone, and having to dredge them up to consciousness. And if you're thinking in therapeutic terms, confront that memory or understand the lesson that is to be had from a part of you or a memory of an episode of your life that's long since gone and forgotten and shunted down into the depths of unconsciousness, into the internal underworld. So the nekia can be taken in that metaphorical sense, that sometimes the dead come back to, hopefully to assist the living in some way. Whether they want to come back, I suppose, is an entirely other question. This is not really phrased in the Greek term as being a bit like Casper the friendly ghost turning up to be helpful. It's more some soul in the depths of darkness that's dragged, perhaps unwillingly, or arm twisted through commandments and magic and ritualistic sacrifices and so on, into coming up and being compelled to answer the questions of the living. It's not a friendly ritual in any sense. But then, I suppose, again, if we're thinking as a metaphor for therapy, engaging with the dead and forgotten parts of yourself is not exactly a friendly thing to do either. It's a painful, dark, difficult, sometimes perhaps quite ugly thing to do. And the sacrifices may well be of states of mind, of complacency and happiness and calmness and all that goes out of the window for a while, whilst the dredging up of the inner darkness takes place. So it, again, as a practice, it can be understood in a variety of contexts, either as attempts at things like mediumship and clairvoyance, or in a more metaphorical sense. But just a few thoughts on the idea of harrowing and journeying into darkness, journeying into the depths of despair. There are variant stories, just to I suppose, brief mention. There's a popular medieval tale which I quite like for obvious reasons, which is kind of a harrowing, but also kind of not. There's a story that runs about the robin, the bird, not me, the bird, that is described as originally looking very much like a sparrow, just this sort of dull brown little bird, but it hears the cries of people in hell. It's a Christian story. It hears the souls in torment in hell and feels so much compassion for them that it flies into hell with a beak full of water, because people burning in hell are crying out in thirst and so on, and the little bird opens its beak, spits out the water so that the souls in torment can drink of it, and in the process it flies so close to the hellfires that it gets burnt, hence the red breast. And the red feathering is attributed to the fires of hell, and the idea that the robin bird is especially compassionate and kind, and he's trying to help people who, for mainstream Christian belief, are beyond help. And there are certain Christian sects which have the idea that hell is not forever and ever. Hell is for a period. It's a bit like a prison sentence. You're there for a period to serve your sentence, and then you potentially, if you've repented of your naughty ways, you can be redeemed and go up to heaven. And so perhaps there's a bit of that kind of theology underpinning that little folk tale, in that if those souls in hell are there forevermore, there's absolutely nothing that the Robin or anyone else can do to help them. But if they're there for a period, then acts of kindness towards them may be meaningful, in that they may have an effect. They may help the soul in torment move to a position where it is no longer in torment. But that is, for some Christian traditions, that's considered absolute heresy, and they regard hell as permanent, as a one-way ticket from which nobody ever comes back. But it was a popular kind of folk tale about the bird, and how, a bit like a Rudyard Kipling story, that one of those how-to, how the elephant got its trunk type of story, how the robin got its red feathers, by brazening it out on a journey into hell, not to per se rescue anyone, but rather not to rescue a thing or an object, not to bring it out, but to take something in the water, to take it into hell. So there is the potential there for variations of a story, that perhaps sometimes the journey into darkness is not to bring something back, but to take something in, a gift, to those who dwell in darkness, to those who dwell in terrible places. And there are lots of stories from the real world of individuals who have been in horrifically dark situations, and somebody has given them some small act of kindness, shared a little food, a warm scarf to wrap around their neck on freezing days, some small act of kindness which hasn't sprung them free from the horrible situation that they were in, but nonetheless is always remembered afterwards as a kind of a light in the darkness, a golden act of kindness. And when they have finally eventually got out of their hellish situation, they remember that person who did some little kindness for them, some little compassionate act. And maybe that helps to restore their faith in humanity, because obviously people going through hellish experiences, one thing they frequently lose, for perfectly understandable reasons, is any faith at all. Not just faith in the divine sense of religious faith, but faith in their fellow human beings. If you've been subject to the cruelty and barbarity and a monstrousness of some other person or a whole bunch of other people who are tormenting you beyond all sanity, then even if you escape from them, that can leave scars so deep that you never again ever trust another human being, and you regard all people as potential monsters, and lose all hope, all faith, and that's not a pleasant state to live in, because you're kind of taking hell with you. So even if you've got away from your tormentors, they have damaged you so badly that you're kind of seeing the shadows of them wherever you go. And even when you meet kind people, nice people, decent people, you don't see them as kind and nice and decent. You see them as monsters in waiting, as it were. And so if you've got that state of mind, you never truly escape from hell. It goes with you. It harrows you still. But I think that's enough waffling from me. I'll leave it there. It'd be interesting to see if anyone's got any kind of views on this, or stories indeed that they want to share and bounce around.